This is the WTF Bach podcast. The podcast about Johann Sebastian Bach, brought to you by his prodigal son, WTF Bach. Join WTF Bach as he guides your mind through a contrapuntal journey. Why don't you let WTF Bach guide you? And now, here's WTF Bach.
Hello, it's WTF Bach. Evan Shinners, welcome to the show. The point of this show is to get you to hear Bach with better understanding, to set your ears on certain aspects of a rather complex music, how to listen, and hopefully to enrich your experience listening to this vast, sublime music. Now, from time to time, I bring onto the show experts in the field of Bach, notable scholars or performers, and today I'm very pleased to be speaking with Paul Jacobs. It is really my privilege. Paul is the head of the organ department at Juilliard. He's someone I've had on my radar for a long time. I have been under his spell since the beginning. He plays regularly with major symphony orchestras. He collaborates with prominent conductors, which I would say is unusual for an organist. He is certainly leading the field in this regard. This spring, he'll appear with the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, the Cleveland Orchestra, and on music festivals from California to Switzerland. He made musical history at the age of 23 when he performed Bach's complete organ works in an 18-hour concert. Should I repeat that? Yes. He made musical history at the age of 23 when he performed Bach's complete organ works in an 18-hour concert. Amazing. He is the first and only organ soloist to have received a Grammy for Messiaen. Put that on your list of musical achievements. I'm going to win a Grammy, but he won a Grammy playing Messiaen. Now, I got to Juilliard when I was 18 years old, and Paul Jacobs was there. I think he could have been mistaken as a student. He was only a few years older than the students, but he was faculty. We were all a bit scared. The rumor was that he had played all Bach from memory without even getting up. I remember scoffing when hearing that. Once he walked past me and some friends, someone said, he's the organ teacher. Huh? He is the organ teacher. Him? He's not a student? No, he's faculty. And then the myths came. I heard he played 18 hours of Bach in one sitting. I heard he played all of Messiaen's music from memory. No, I heard he plays everything from memory, like Franck, Reger, Fauré. He plays the whole repertoire. He's got it. Even the jazz faculty respected him. In those days, the jazz faculty loved to patronize the classical musicians, but I remember Ben Wolf, the bass teacher, I can't forget this one image of him saying, "Yeah, this dude's bad." Anyhow, I sort of pushed such stories out of my mind. I didn't have a mind like that. I had to keep my head down, focus on my own studies however I could. But then when I was about 28 or 29, I realized I had worked my way through about 75-80% of Bach's keyboard repertoire, and I started thinking, maybe I could pull a Paul Jacobs. Now, I've told my story elsewhere on the podcast. I won't go into it because this is Paul's episode, but in short, Jacobs was my inspiration for years, someone who set the bar so high. It was something to aim at, something to reach for, kept me occupied for years, his accomplishments. These days, I'm very lucky to be in touch with Paul Jacobs. I feel like he's a sort of a organ Zen master to me. I haven't played for him in person, though I might have that happy opportunity. But when I ask him a question about music or technique, I hear the answer in my own question. It comes back at me immediately, like a koan. That's the mark of a great teacher. But not only a teacher, he's a masterly performer, a real performer. You will gather that from the interview. The memory isn't done for the sake of being impressive or just for the sake of memorization. The memory is for the sake of the performance. He rehearses the pulling of the stops as one would rehearse the pressing of the notes. And I finally reached out to him after all these years for an interview because he's been touring with the Art of Fugue. The first season of the show was devoted to the Art of Fugue, so we had to get this interview. We discussed the Art of Fugue in depth at the end of our talk, but about halfway through, we realized we had something in common, which I think is an important topic in classical music, an urgent topic, if I may. Pop culture, the relation of classical music to pop culture, self-expression in classical music, the YouTube classical musicians using music to elevate or maybe to lower oneself. Now, I've recently mentioned a few things like that on the show, so this is even timely, our talk. We got a bit carried away. We talked for over 3 hours. Now, obviously, I've only included a little bit of that. This show is ultimately aimed at how to listen to Bach's music, but I think that our social commentary is important and connected to the goal. And I think if you're interested in the way that classical music is present in our culture, Or on the contrary, if you don't really think about how music is distributed in our culture, those specific portions of our talk will really appeal to you. So that's the order: a general introduction to Mr. Jacobs and his accomplishments, his musical background, his 18-hour Bach marathon, and then pop culture, pop music, social media, classical music, the deeper purpose of Bach's music and of music in general. Finally, the art fugue, followed by a brief survey of the entire organ repertoire. So, here we go.
And now, please welcome to the show, Paul Jacobs. Mr. Paul Jacobs.
Paul Jacobs, thanks very much for being on the show.
It's wonderful to be with you, Evan.
Now, I'm so excited to have the time to ask you all these questions because I admit when I was walking the halls of Juilliard, we pianists and probably we musicians were always haunted by this presence of a man only a few years older than we who had played all the Bach from memory. So, can I mention some myths about you, and can you confirm which parts of them have grown into tall tales?
I'm happy to do that, if I can.
You were seen at Curtis going into practice when most people were going to bed and walking out when people were waking up. You were so focused that you hardly socialized, you didn't keep many friends, you never touched a glass of alcohol, and it seems like by the time you were finishing with your undergraduate, you said, you know, the 250th anniversary of Bach's death is coming. I'm going to sit down and play his entire organ works from memory in one sitting. A couple months later, you got a phone call from Juilliard saying, ahem, how would you like to take over the organ department?
Well, you got a few of those things right. Yes, I mean, going back to the beginning of what you said, as a student at Curtis, I guess I was pretty intense, very serious, adored Bach's music, even way back when, amongst other composers. But I would practice late. The organists, I think, were the only ones allowed 24 hours access to the building to practice because the organ was in the hall and it was always in use. And so I would work until 2, 3 in the morning quite often. And on the night before our organ class, I would sometimes stay until 6 in the morning, go home to my apartment for 3 hours of sleep and then come back. But it was all of that music that just, thank God, propelled me on, and I believed in enough. Then I went to grad school at Yale and undertook a Messiaen marathon. I kind of got into Messiaen for a period. And then the dean of Juilliard at the time contacted me about teaching. So I think that addresses most of what you said. As far as alcohol, I didn't drink a whole lot. Maybe my last year, I started to enjoy a little bit of port, but that was about it.
July 28th, 2000, all from memory?
No, not all from memory. I had memorized all of Bach's organ works, but in that very concentrated form, I did not play everything from memory. Some of the more obscure chorale preludes, etc., I decided it would be wise to put the score up there, even though I had memorized them previously.
And you had a cup of chocolate pudding and only water. No food.
That was my only sustenance for the 18 hours. I mean, it was a kind of an amazing thing because, I didn't notice hunger or fatigue during that period. And I think it was around noon, I had a 2-minute break, and I thought, well, I'm just going to chug down this Swiss Miss chocolate pudding, and it was satisfying. And then I just sailed from that point on, and it was okay. I don't know how that happened. I remember at 12:30 a.m. the following day being ravenous. And, after it was all over, I went to a local diner and scarfed down about 5 cheeseburgers. So
Okay. Do you tend to do that before concerts normally? Fast a little bit or not eat much?
I don't have a normal routine before concerts. I don't want to be hungry, so probably something light to eat. Probably you're the same way. One doesn't want to overeat either and be sluggish during performance.
You played the concert in 14 segments, which is a classy touch. Every listener of this show knows that 14 was Bach's number. Can you take us through the segments briefly? What did you start with, for example?
Sure. I'm not sure I remember the exact order of all of the pieces, but I know I began the first part with Bach's Saint Anne Prelude. third part of the Klavierbogen intact. And that is about 90 minutes of some of the densest writing, of course. It's kind of up there. Same vintage as Art of Fugue, really. I mean, around the same period. And I love how Bach lures the listener in with this very appealing St. Anne prelude. And then he goes into some of the thorniest and most exotic chorale preludes, and then, of course, ends with the famous St. Anne fugue. So I remember that was the first part of the program, and I couldn't recall. Each of the segments, I wanted to present a variety of chorale preludes, concertos, trio sonatas, preludes, and fugues. I ended the whole marathon with the Passacaglia.
So it wasn't organized, say, 6 trio sonatas in a row, the grade 18 in a row.
No, I didn't want to do it that way. No. And in fact, the reason I offered it in 14 segments is because previously I had performed the marathon concerts in 14 evenings in Philadelphia and then again in New York City. And I just kept those 14 programs in order and just decided to do them instead of 14 evenings in one day.
Wow. Okay. What about something like the Neumeister chorales? And I think in 2008, the Neue Bach Ausgabe published this additional volume of organ music. Now it's volume 10 and they're complete. And I think a couple years after your recital, they published another volume of doubtful works. Did any of those make it into your recital, or did any of that music, do you play it now?
Yes, I do play it now, but I will tell you that the Neumeister chorales I did not include. Far be it from me to ever criticize Bach. They're very early works of the composer, and I dare say maybe not as interesting. I mean, still they're very well-written pieces, but in my opinion, it was in Weimar that he very firmly established himself. His musical signature became immediately apparent.
I want to talk about shoes.
Yes.
I want to talk about organ shoes, obviously. Before I started studying organ, I was sort of bewildered by what exactly an organ shoe was. And I've seen a recording of you on Instagram. I think you're in Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh in what I think are socks. Now, is that because you didn't have organ shoes with you? Is there a benefit to playing in socks?
There is a benefit to playing in socks. You don't have to worry about carrying the shoes around. And it's comfortable, quite frankly, just like walking around your living room in slippers or stocking feet. I don't normally perform in just socks, but we had a rehearsal with the Pittsburgh Symphony that morning, and I, for whatever reason, didn't have my shoes. And so that's the only reason I was wearing socks then. But I will frequently practice in socks when it's just me. You don't have as much control of the heel. Organists, of course, play with their toes and heels. And so we have the special shoes with the extended heel, lightweight, all leather. They're kind of like dance shoes, Capezio shoes.
I must admit, I realized that organ shoes are about 3 times the price of Capezios, so I bought some Capezios. Am I really missing out?
Well, I don't know because I've not worn Capezios, but I do know some organists that have actually used Capezios and they say they work very well. But I recommend Organ Master shoes if you're looking.
Let's talk about the pedal boards. I feel like the amateur organist may have trouble switching from the variations of a pedal board, the various shapes that you encounter. Can you briefly talk us through the different styles of pedal board?
Yes, of course, with organs generally, there's no real, well, let's just say that each instrument is dramatically different from one to the next. And as far as the pedal boards are concerned, some are flat and some are modern, sometimes called concave radiating, and that developed in the 19th century. But Bach had flat pedal boards, and this usually means that you can use very little heel to play Baroque music and pre-Baroque music for that matter. Mostly toes, which works well, but on modern pedal boards or concave radiating pedal boards, you can use your toe and your heel. But it does take some adjustment because the proportions are slightly different. And I mean, I guess it would be like getting in a cockpit of a plane and having all the gears in different locations, and you have to figure out where everything is and just acquaint yourself with just the sensation of playing pedals and keys that might be slightly larger or smaller. If you're playing on a modern Steinway, you know that all the keys are exactly the same size, is uniform, whether you're playing a piano in the United States or in England or in Germany or in Russia or in China. It doesn't really matter. But not the case with organ.
I knew you were a double major, harpsichord and organ at Curtis, but I recently read that you played piano through your first year.
I love the piano. I studied the piano very seriously from, I guess, age 4 or 5 and into my first year at Curtis. And I still practice on the piano. I don't play publicly on the piano, but I love the instrument and its repertoire. And I do a lot of organ practice on the piano. I mean, you can only go so far before you need to employ your feet. But the manual part, the hands, we can still work on a piano.
I wonder if Chopin's music works on the organ.
Well, I do know that Chopin played the organ. When I was in Warsaw a few years ago, I went to a number of the churches where he played the organ, and he apparently wrote at least 1 or 2 organ pieces that sadly have been lost. So he had more than a passing familiarity with the organ. And of course, Liszt was quite an organist.
Can we talk about making the jump from each instrument to the organ? Is it easier, do you think, for a harpsichordist to become an organist than a pianist because of the similarities in articulation, or is that conclusion not so easily drawn?
I don't think that conclusion is so easily drawn, Evan. I think that the organ's repertoire is so vast. There's not another instrument. I mean, we can go back to the Robertsbridge Codex of the 14th century, and there's an unbroken chain of repertoire until our time today, many centuries. So if you're a harpsichordist and want to play Baroque music, and you find a Baroque organ, maybe that you can transfer fairly easily. But if you are a pianist playing Mendelssohn and Schumann and Reger and Liszt, all of these other composers, the organ developed very dramatically, the technology, the engineering of the instrument. And so I guess it just depends on what style you want to play. It's really overwhelming when you think about the history of this instrument, not only from an artistic perspective, but from an engineering and technological perspective.
Did you write this, or is this someone else who said that the clock and the organ were the most complete mechanisms up until the 19th century? Does that sound like something that you wrote, or?
I've certainly cited that quote, but it's true. Until the Industrial Revolution, the pipe organ was the most complicated invention of humanity. And it's amazing. I mean, even today, going into an organ chamber, your jaw drops. People who have never seen the inner workings of a pipe organ are astonished when they walk inside one.
How proficient are you at repairing organs?
Well, I'm not mechanically inclined. There are some organists who are quite versatile and can kind of get in there. I mean, if there's a cipher is when a pipe doesn't stop speaking. You're not actually depressing a key, but the pipe is stuck open, the valve is stuck open. I mean, I can hopefully locate it and pull the pipe, fix that, and tune minor issues, but I'm not really an expert at organ maintenance. Though apparently Bach was himself very versatile with the mechanics and inner workings, and he was very involved with organ design, and I suspect was inside many organ chambers in his lifetime.
Yeah, those reports are incredible. He plays the organ for 30 seconds and then writes this 2-page report. You need to replace this bellow with this. It's Incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So let's say in some wonderful scenario, you're teaching pianists for the summer in some lovely remote villa in like a castle or something, and you've got 3 months to teach pianists the organ. How do you start them off? What repertoire would you start with? What would you do?
Well, if we're dealing with pianists, I mean, again, I often think that the romantic repertoire is just so central, and it's just where the heart is. Chopin and Beethoven and Brahms, and I would try to find some overlap with those composers. So I would show them the Mendelssohn organ sonatas, the six sonatas, and of course the preludes and fugues, which were very important works of the time and very influential in kind of redirecting musicians of his time back to the organ. And these are stunning pieces of music, so well crafted. And I think that would hopefully excite people and show them Brahms. I mean, Brahms didn't leave us so much, but we know that his final opus were 11 chorale preludes written for the organ, and they were published posthumously. And of course, Schumann loved the organ. We know of Robert Schumann's quotes in his Axioms for Young Musicians, where he says, "Lose no opportunity to study the organ." And he tells you about the benefits of this. So I don't think it would be that hard. I mean, we're in an age of specialization now. And so a lot of fine pianists are reluctant or not encouraged by their teachers today to have even a curiosity about the organ, which is a real pity. That would have been foreign to the great 19th century pianists. I mean, Rachmaninoff also had some organ technique, we know. When he visited New York City, he has been to St. Patrick's Cathedral and played the organ on occasion. And, many pianists have been at least familiar, if not decent organists throughout history. So I'd love to rekindle that interest.
Can you quote any of those axioms by Schumann off the top of your head, the benefits of playing the organ?
Yes, I wish I had it handy, but one was lose no opportunity to study the organ. There is no other instrument which exacts such revenge upon a weak technique or flimsy composition, something like that. But basically,
that's lovely.
It really puts the magnifying glass on the musician, the performer, as well as the quality of a piece of music.
Very good, very good. You call the organ a wind instrument, which I have found very interesting. Not a keyboard instrument, but a wind instrument.
Yeah, a wind and a keyboard instrument, but absolutely, it's an acoustic instrument. That doesn't mean that there isn't a role for electronic or sometimes called digital organs, especially when a good pipe organ isn't available. I'm not adverse to playing one. But there's nothing that compares with thousands of vibrating columns of air, all of these pipes, 32 feet in length, some of them, or very small pipes the size of a straw. You can't even refer to it as an organ recital. It should be an organ concert when you have thousands of pipes coming together in unison. I mean, it's just a grand experience. At least it can be.
Right. How many horrible experiences have you endured?
Well, the organ is it's the most complex instrument musically. Just how it's constructed, and it can attract a very specific type of personality. I mean, you have a lot of very intelligent organists out there, but sometimes what's lacking is the heart. There's a lot of head, there's a lot of brain, but the emotion is not always there. For me, I guess in a way, I'm a romantic at heart. I want to be moved by music, and I want others to be moved by music. The organ shouldn't be just this kind of dry academic thing, but sometimes it can be. It's just a bunch of musicologists. Some organists seem to be 80% scholar and 20% performer, but yet they kind of promote themselves as, a great organist. They may be decent organists, but to be a real artist and virtuoso, that itself takes a lifetime of study and dedication, and not to minimize the work of a good musical scholar, a good musicologist. But I think it's important to distinguish. And there are some organists who maybe specialize in a certain type of music, and And it doesn't really require the daily maintenance, the hours of practice every day. Sometimes it's sight-readable music that they might have a good sense of the style, but they don't really deepen their relationship with the art form on a robust basis. That's unfortunate, I think, because that's where the passion for an art form comes from. The suffering, the enduring, the frustrations that a musician goes through when things don't work out. And you're sitting there by yourself in a room, and you struggle with the difficulties of a piece, and you do it day in and day out for weeks, for months, for years, sometimes with the same piece of music. There's no substitution for that.
It seems like you're talking a little bit about at least if we were to narrow that to Bach, there seems to be this divide about playing Bach in the manner in which it may have been played on the period instruments, and then saying, no, excuse me, Bach was a really modern musician, and when the forte piano came on the scene, he wrote and played for the forte piano. You align with the modern spirit, playing Bach, changing the registration during Bach fugues, for example.
Yes, I am not a purist. I have the highest regard for what the historical performance movement has done and continues to do. And my own playing incorporates many of those techniques and attitudes. But as a modern organist, I want to be able to convey the message of Bach's music, and other composers, of course, on all kinds of instruments. And many times that's not a Baroque replica or a neo-Baroque organ. It's not meant to mimic a Schnittke or a Silbermann, these great organ builders of the 18th century, 17th and 18th centuries. I also am moved by Karl Richter, what Richter did with his cantatas. Of course, he was despised by the HP movement, and it was mutual. He despised them. It seemed to be this mutual dismissiveness. That's unfortunate, because I think what Richter did was equally valid. I mean, what Glenn Gould did, what Wanda Landowska did on the harpsichord. I mean, she was playing a Pleyel. I mean, there's nothing historic about that kind of harpsichord, but does that make the power of her interpretations any less valid? I don't think so. And so I take that same attitude in my playing.
You've claimed that you have a method of memorizing music. Is that a secret, or can you share it with us?
No, it's not a secret. I talk about it with students. I mean, the mind, the human brain is a very mysterious thing, and I'm not sure I know exactly how I memorize. If I think too much about it, then it's easy to derail during a performance. We can concentrate too much, and we can concentrate too little. But what we hope to do in our practice is prepare. And very generally speaking, I think of any piece as a pie, and you just cut up that pie into slices, into manageable portions. So if you're memorizing a large work, cut it up into small sections and memorize each, and then stitch them together. In my scores, I will use memory posts, little symbols that I write in. It's not just that I know where they are, but I actually visually write in the score the memory post. And I found that this helps me. I don't have a photographic memory. I have to work very hard at memorization. If I had a photographic memory, it would be easy to memorize. I just look at it and there it is. But I do find that the more one memorizes and writes things in the score, there is a visual aspect to memorization, that I can see the page, generally speaking, and where I have memory posts. And that's very helpful with large works.
I was planning to ask you what your favorite Beatles song is, but you're more or less outspoken on your views of popular music.
Pop music has never really done very much for me. And it's ubiquitous in our culture. It's in the background everywhere, often as an unrequested imposition. Musicians, I would like to think, are trained to listen. We can't just half listen. I don't want to half listen. And when I am listening to music, I'm always expecting a lot. I'm looking for things. I want the music to do something for me. And I know that there are very good musicians in all genres. That's not the thing, but I think just sort of the mass-produced music, these 4-minute pop songs that are famous for a period and get everybody excited, and it's on to the next thing. I wish that people were able to experience what music was earlier in time. The music of Bach, to not have any acquaintance with his major masterpieces, I would say is most unfortunate.
I read a great interview of yours from 20 years ago in the Diapason, where you mentioned that you were on NPR, and the interviewer said, some people would say they don't like the organ. What would you say to that? And you went on to explain that we live in this culture that says, prove that this has value to me. Show me that XYZ is worthwhile and that there's no initiative on the individual's part. So how does one take initiative? How are you supposed to, if you've never heard of Bach, where do you begin?
You just have to meet people where they are in your sphere and do what you can. But we're up against kind of a culture industry. I mean, isn't that Adorno and all of these other thinkers? But I think they were right about at least some things, this sort of mass-produced culture, and there's a lot of money at stake in what people are given and what people are conditioned to thinking is quality and important. And so, how does anybody individually counteract this? It's not easy to do. And I rack my brains probably every day thinking about it. It can be a little frustrating and even depressing at times. But then we return to these masterpieces of Bach and others, and it just restores our spirits. I think Bach was not great because we all voted on it.
Well, it's a huge issue. We are sort of up against a culture which is trying to do exactly what you said, saying, in fact, we did vote that Bach was the composer and there is no objectivity. I mean, how do you deal with someone who says, well, very good, you play Bach's music, but isn't that the same as the music that I experienced today? And I went to this concert of whatever popular music and I had a really transcendent experience. You can't undermine my personal experience.
Yeah, and it's true. You can't. And I can't tell people what they feel or should feel, nor can they tell me. Let me put it this way. Years ago, I got into a very intense argument that became even heated with somebody. I won't mention his name, but somebody I respect very much. And I said, I think that we're a musically illiterate culture. And this person who knows a lot about classical music was incensed. He says, how can you say that? And I said, well, I don't say that to be mean or to think of myself as, being superior or know-it-all. I'm just trying to be accurate. Ours is a culture which, on the whole, doesn't know any music history. They know no music before their own generation, usually. And they don't read music and they don't play music. It's just pure consumption and just pure subjective hyper-individualism. And, there's no sense of music as discipline. Music is not just an art, but it's a discipline, and there's an enormous history. I think of Art of Fugue. This work it reminds us of the science of music, the rigor of music. Again, it's not just one's individual feelings. It is that, but it's much more than just that. And so maybe these are things that I would like to point out.
Res severa verum gaudium. True joy is a serious matter. You mentioned in a New York Times article, the Times writes about you very frequently, which I think is wonderful. You're proud to be a serious musician. So who are the non-serious musicians?
Well, it's not necessarily for me to say. I can't look into other people's hearts, but I would say this. In terms of classical music, I look at repertoire. I look at repertoire and what is being promoted, what is being played, what is being studied. What does a musician spend his or her life occupied with? If it's just bonbons, if it's just show music trying to get clicks and attention, well, then one might legitimately ask the question. But you can kind of tell that somebody is probing the depths of an art or music. I mean, even if I don't understand it, I hope to be able to respect a seriousness and a deliberateness about an individual. I hope to be able to recognize that in myself. I mean, I hope I can see that in other people, whatever kind of music they're after and looking into. And if it's just about, again, fame and social media stuff, and then that gets old very quickly. And there's the old saying, he who marries the spirit of an age winds up a widow in the next. And I think that is the danger of that. You get the throngs of people for a year or two or a little longer, but then they're on to the next thing. Classical music is not easy to pursue. It requires tremendous sacrifice. It's a relatively small industry. There's a lot of competition. There's no guarantee of a pot of gold. It's not lucrative. And it's not going to be easy to sustain a career in classical music for anybody. So if you can't, as a student, have developed that spine, to have some steel within you, it's going to be hard to keep that going for a lifetime.
But it is the fact that it is such a serious matter that brings true joy. I've often, personally, it doesn't matter how much money I can make or won't make or don't make, but it's the fact that I know I can throw myself onto these centuries of people. I know that the fact that my fingers are dancing over the keyboard in the same configuration that Chopin and Mendelssohn played a Bach piece. There's something there that connects me and brings true joy.
Absolutely, Evan. I agree with you. And I mean, I think Mozart was buried in a pauper's grave, for goodness sake, one of the greatest geniuses. And Bach, he kept his household in order. I mean, it was astonishing, but he wasn't, I don't think, a very rich man. And you look at his own wife, Anna Magdalena, at least the second one, she died poor, and Wilhelm Friedman died poor. CPE seemed to have his act together, but it's never been easy for artists and musicians, I don't think, historically. But true joy is a serious matter, and I appreciate that quote, Re severa verum gaudium. I believe that.
The career of the YouTube musician is one that I've wanted to ask you about, and any little gimmick that will get people watching. And the statistics are alarming. You know, certain musicians that have world-class careers with a few hundred followers versus someone you've never heard of with hundreds of thousands of followers. And what kind of message is this giving?
I find that there is a danger with the excesses of young musicians and social media. They're viewing videos as sort of the portal to present music to the public. And yes, there are advantages in that it can reach a lot of people. But when I listen honestly with my ears to the product that's being presented, oftentimes I'm unimpressed by the level of artistry. Sometimes it's mediocre, frankly, but the choreography, the camera angles, there might be drones, all of that's very flashy and very impressive. The production is very fine, but the music making is not particularly compelling. And I think that for me, I want to present the best music. And I have enough faith in it and enough faith in people that it's possible to connect with them. But I think one of the biggest challenges is being able to convey a sense of history, what music used to be, the heights to which music soared in the past. And people don't have exposure to this, unfortunately, today. And I'm not sure that the video medium is really achieving this. I don't think that it is. It's brief, it's short, and again, you find sensational titles, the biggest this, the shortest that, just quirkiness. And it attracts a lot of attention, but it doesn't go far enough. And I would love to see people understand what music meant historically speaking. It wasn't just about individuals expressing themselves. There was something objective. There was something people were going out of themselves. And that's really where the greatest joy comes, I think.
I wonder if it's that people are not interested in learning about the objective and the past. They're really interested in expressing themselves, learning about who they are. What are the perils of that?
Yeah, yes, that's the old human nature. We tend to go for the easy, and we don't want to invest too much if we don't have to. But the rewards come when you start digging, when you go out to meet the object. It's not just about the subject. I spend my life, and you do too, Evan. You go out to meet the laws of music, whatever they happen to be. You know they're out there. You know it's not just all about you. Even a little kid who's just studied the piano or the violin or any other instrument, you begin to see very quickly there's something that you have to conform yourself to. It's not just about conforming the subject to you and to your needs. It also just reminds us today that life might be more than grammar and logic and politics, and even more than society. It might be more than just things that we can figure out and discern. Maybe there's mystery. Maybe there will always be mystery in life. And there's a wordless knowledge. I think that's what music reinforces. The idea of music is that there is a wordless reality. Something that I think about regularly. I was paying some degree of homage to the historical performance movement. I've often thought that they get everything right about the performance. They go into a church, a historic building, they light candles, the building has sumptuous acoustics, you have excellently trained musicians. But it's important to remember, for true authenticity, these works, these cantatas of Bach, were religious pieces. They were part of the Lutheran service. These are works steeped in theology, and they encompassed a whole worldview. And I can't help but think that these questions, they haven't gone away. I mean, we might not be asking them as much today, but these questions of the divine and the infinite, this music can still open up. And so therefore, I've always been more interested in these questions than the correct bowing or the correct fingering or the proper instrument to use. Music is often a substitute for the divine and for the transcendent. It is for many people. I mean, some people admit it. They're not religious, but music is their God, that kind of thing. And I don't think that was the case for Bach. Music was not God for him. Clearly it wasn't. But it can be a portal to the divine. It can be. And that's very powerful. And this is one of the great questions that a human being can ask, the God question. Even the atheists, the honest atheists admit that. Nietzsche. You don't deny that question. And this music could open up gates to this kind of conversation, theological, philosophical questions. Maybe not to everybody, but my sense is that performance style is less interesting to the average person than these timeless questions of God and meaning. And I believe this music can serve as a gateway to just that.
They're related. I see the social media the instant gratification and the HP movement getting everything right except for the message. In my mind, I think it's kind of about looking. It's still about looking. I was really sort of surprised when I read that the cantatas in Bach's world would have been performed in the organ loft with the congregation facing the other way. And I thought that completely changes your reception of music. I mean, because you can't look with your eyes. You're not even facing the music, so you're forced to sit there and kind of steep yourself in the whole theological aspect of it. I would love to see, concerts where people have to face the other way or something like that. I mean, they do dining in the dark, which is really nice because then you have to rethink everything about your meal.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, these were very practical pieces. The musicians, everybody was hidden, and the sound just washed over you, and you were there contemplating and listening and reflecting. And they weren't secular concert pieces, these cantatas. It's important to remember that. So if we're really interested in historical authenticity, we don't shine the spotlights on the musicians in a way, with the cantatas at least.
Is the fundamental thing that people are missing when they're putting out all this social media classical music? Is it live performance? And sort of as a follow-up to that, do you yourself feel most contented with music when you're giving a live performance or when you are entering into a communion with the composer, even in private?
Oh, well, I can tell you that the most overwhelming experiences I've had making music, you're saying whether it's doing a private practice session or working alone or in front of an audience. And in a way, I would say, I'm not overly sentimental. I don't cry a whole lot. But I would say there have been a few instances where I've been working on something, and just the sheer magnitude of the music, the power, it hits me, and I just, my eyes well, and I don't know why. It's not that I'm sad.
And this is in private?
In private. I mean, when we're performing, though, a little bit of us, at least, has to be objective. We're professional musicians when we're in front of an audience. And so you have to, it's like flying a plane, you got to...
You can't get sentimental.
Yeah. You got to keep on track. And you have to be listening objectively, at least a little bit, to what you're doing. I would say that the moments that have really affected me and I felt most close with music, I have been alone with it and been working. That doesn't mean to say that I'm unmoved when I'm playing music for an audience, and that can be stimulating in a very special way too. I mean, to feel a bond with an audience, I mean, that's also a miracle. I mean, to people you don't know, and you feel with hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people, this connection, this link, that you're all on this odyssey together. And again, you're dealing with people with different, they come at different emotional states, different levels of awareness, however, and you're all united. That's also something that simply cannot be replicated online.
Can you think of any specific recent moments when you were welling up about music, about a piece?
Yes, actually. Not many, but I was practicing. This was at Disney Hall, and this was actually a few years ago. And I know this has happened to me since, but this one really got to me. And I was presenting Bach's third part of the Klavierbund with this chorale prelude, the Als Tiefernote. It's the only other example, as you know, of six-part counterpoint other than the musical offering. Double pedaling. And it is truly one of the most terrifying things that Bach wrote.
So tell me, what happened?
I kind of midway through, and I'm glad nobody came into the hall while I was practicing, because I just broke down. I mean, the beauty of it, and I just kept going, and I don't know what happened. It was that ecstatic moment, and I'm grateful for it.
Let's finally talk about the art of fugue and the organ repertoire. I want to begin with a paragraph by David Moroni, the harpsichordist. I want to tell me where you disagree. I quote, "Bach did indeed specifically write the work thinking primarily of practical performance on the harpsichord. The entire work is playable by the 10 fingers of 2 hands. The open score notation is a standard keyboard notation for counterpoint. The top note, high E, found in Fugue 13, is a rarity in Bach's works. It was available on harpsichords in the 1740s, but usually not available on organs whose top note was normally C or D. Once it is accepted as definitely keyboard music, the question still remains, which keyboard? One feature in particular argues strongly against Bach having conceived it with organ primarily in mind. The bass line in his big organ works always shows unmistakable signs of having been composed for the feet, not the fingers. Those signs are entirely absent from the art of fugue."
Well, I would say a number of things to that comment. I think it's agreed that these fugues are conceived with the keyboard in mind. I mean, they could be played by anybody. But I look at Klavierbung Part 3, and you have manual leader as well as chorale preludes with the pedal. And so some of the fugues, I would say, in Art of Fugue do lend themselves. The bass line seems very idiomatic. I'm thinking of number 11, quite frankly, to the organ. And the harpsichord, with all due respect, I love the instrument, but the first time I heard Art of Fugue live, and the only time I heard the Art of Fugue live, was on the harpsichord, and it did not excite me. You're dealing with a work with every fugue is in D minor, and it seemed very monochrome and limited dynamic range. And again, maybe for one's own pleasure, you could sit at a harpsichord, but for a public performance, I think that practically speaking, Art of Fugue is a hard sell on the harpsichord. I think that the organ, with its varied registers and all of the color, I mean, it's an orchestra. It could be a Baroque ensemble or a modern orchestra, however you want to realize it. But it captures the gravity, the grandeur, the sublimity of some of these fugues that the harpsichord, I just don't think is able to do. But it also can capture the intimacy. I mean, you can play the organ on just the manuals. You don't have to use your feet. I mean, the organ, keyboard instruments were interchangeable. That's why I don't think you can say it was just for the harpsichord. It could have easily been for the organ too. And again, I would cite in my argument the third part of the Klavierbung, which has manual leader chorale preludes for the organ plus ones with pedal. That's what I would say.
Your arrangement, I've seen you playing 8 as manual leader. Which other ones do you play as just manuals? Or does it depend actually on which organ you're on?
It depends on which organ, but I think about half of them I play manual leader, and then the other half with pedal, and it works very well. The proof is in the pudding, really. I mean, how does the audience receive the work? I mean, artistically, what is the result? I mean, that's what matters.
I'm thinking of the unfinished fugue and the second subject there. Do you take that subject in the feet when it comes in?
No, that last fugue in 3 sections. The first fugue, that gorgeous motet, just kind of draped in compassion and warmth, and that works very well with hands and feet. The second fugue, you go to the second, to another keyboard, rook positive. It can be manual leader. You're right. The running 16th notes are not idiomatic for the pedal. It can be done by a good organist, but it's not idiomatic. But the last fugue, the last final BACH incomplete, that is spectacular on the organ.
Yes.
And I don't know of any other instrument or combination of instruments that can capture the sublimity of the final fugue better than a great organ.
Do you believe it was finished?
No, I think Bach left the work incomplete. I think he just didn't have the time to complete it. He died, and he would have finished it, absolutely. Now, there's also some discussion about CPE writing the note in the score that this is where my father died, and Christoph Wolff and others have mentioned that it's probably not accurate, and I don't discount what they're saying, but we don't really know what happened. And Bach could have had that manuscript near him. It could have been in his chamber where he died, and he could have still had thoughts. Maybe he wasn't literally, with the quill and ink writing on the page when he died, but I think what CPE said is probably accurate, and it instills wonder. I mean, there's the wonder of that ending. It's just what an appropriate way for Bach to go, I think.
I mean, miraculous, actually.
Yes.
The first thing that struck me about your playing Art of Fugue, and I sadly haven't seen it live, but I've been watching what you've been putting out online. The first thing that strikes me is your tempi. I felt that one of the reasons the Art of Fugue doesn't find a public is because everyone plays it so slowly. But these are fugues in cut time,
Yep.
And you really play in cut time.
Yes, I completely agree with you. There are a few organ recordings out there, and oh dear, I find the same thing. They're just kind of like a dirge, some of them, just so slow and heavy-handed. And again, with some fugues, you do want to have that gravity, but not all of them. There needs to be a lot of variety and some virtuosity. And, I think even within these fugues, there are still a few moments of levity. Not many, but there are lighter moments where Bach is more playful.
The canons, have you ever considered including them?
I have considered, they're astonishing creations. For live performance, that might just be a bridge too far. I think they just most people might get lost in the two-voice canons. Again, it's not a comment of their greatness, but I think the 14 fugues just work so well from the first to the last one.
It was either Schiff or Barenboim who said that this is at least 20 years ago, they were working on the Art of Fugue, but that's a lot of D minor in one evening. And I note that now the Art of Fugue seems to be played in about 70 minutes, which is exactly the same as the Goldbergs, which are also in the same key the entire time. So I think we may be living through this sort of revival of the Art of Fugue as it gets to be better known. You mentioned that you were practicing it sort of in secret. Why is that?
Well, I wasn't sure if I could achieve what I had hoped initially. And just backing up one point, you talked about the Goldbergs. Well, with the Goldbergs, though, that first theme, as you know, is much more charming and inviting, whereas the Art of Fugue theme is solemn and serious, but gorgeous in a very different way. But I think there's also no relief. It's It's kind of like a photographer saying that a black and white photograph or the black and white genre of photographs is every bit as rich and varied as color. I mean, we often think of color in color and that having the most variety, but you talk to a good photographer who says no, black and white has all the variation that color does. And I think you could say that about the key of D minor and what Bach is doing with these fugues, even within the limits of the key signature, and most of them are in duple meter, that sort of thing. There's still so much variety to be experienced. But with Goldberg variations, there's a lot more very obvious shifting and changing of mood that might help keep an audience's attention. With Art of Fugue, I mean, from the performer's perspective, it starts off hard and every fugue becomes harder and harder. And you can just never let your guard down. There are just no moments of relief. And I don't know of another work of Bach where you can say that, where just every movement back to back is so intense. Art of Fugue might win the prize for that.
Yeah. I loved what you were saying about the photographer. I do try and ask every guest to explain the Art of Fugue as if explaining it to a child.
Well, again, we don't know entirely the reason Bach wrote it. We have some speculation that he was going to get it published. And I often think that it's Bach's dark chocolate. It's his special reserve scotch. This is music, as he said, even on the title page of Klavierbung 3, this is music for the connoisseur. And Bach knew, I'm sure he knew music that would have more broad appeal and the music that was going to appeal more to those that really knew about music. And Art of Fugue, while I do think that it can have wider appeal, it definitely takes a special kind of listener to an open-mindedness. And, if you do read music, you appreciate it all the more, just to see what he's doing with his counterpoint. I mean, your jaw drops. I have explained to the audiences when I've played this, that maybe a way to think about Art of Fugue is to revisit the arguments from centuries past, where you have people like Kant and Burke and Moses Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn's grandfather. They distinguished between the sublime and the beautiful. And it was an ancient issue that they kind of resurrected in the Enlightenment and beyond that. And the beautiful is kind of marked by order and proportion, and it lures us in, and we agree about how attractive it is. There just seems to be a near consensus about it. Whereas the sublime, it's awe, it's wonder, it's maybe intimidating. It's, a painting of the Caspar David Friedrich. He would paint The Wander in the Fog, and you see mountain ranges, huge mountain ranges, or you look at the sky. It's just some vast landscape that's even a little bit intimidating, and the individual is tiny. And I think that is like Art of Fugue. It's a sublime work, evokes awe and wonder, and we're attracted to it, but it is a little intimidating. And don't expect to get it in one performance, one hearing. I mean, an audience needs to be encouraged to revisit it again and again and again, just like the musicians do.
Can we go a little bit through the organ repertoire? Let's. How could we do it? The Orgelbüchlein. What stands out to you in the Orgelbüchlein? What are the highlights of the? Let's do the highlights of the organ repertoire. What are the highlights of the Orgelbüchlein?
Oh goodness, that would be hard. But let's just say for your listeners, in Dearest Freude. I mean, they're written for New Year's Day, right after Das alte Jahr. The old year passes away, which is a melismatic chorale prelude, with chromaticism, and then the very next one in the set, In Thee is Gladness, in Dearest Freude, and it is just as joyful as anything Bach ever wrote.
The grade 18 chorales, your highlight. I know this is like, again, it's like making a parent name your favorite child, but we have to do it. Which of the grade 18?
Oh, again, I'm not sure I could do that. There are just so many. By the Waters of Babylon is really astonishing. There's the famous Nun Danket Alle Gott, the chorale still sung around the world today, and just to hear what Bach does with that. And of course, the famous settings of Nun kommt der Heidenheiland and the Allein Gott trio. There's a famous trio in A major that just sparkles and dances.
Preludes and fugues. I mean, talk about another universe. How about name one that you don't think people listen to very frequently and would really change their perspective?
Well, I think that I'm always astonished at those people who say they love Bach's music, but yet have a very limited familiarity with his organ works. And especially pianists. I mean, if you're interested in Well-Tempered Clavier, how could you not familiarize yourself with the preludes and fugues? I mean, these are the wedge, for goodness sake. The B minor, where we have that autograph, is so beautiful in Bach's hand. You could practically read it off the page. I mean, he clearly thought so highly of it. The C major, the late C major with that stretto fugue. I mean, these are miracles, every one of them. And of course, the scale of these, particularly these preludes and fugues written in Leipzig for the organ, they're bigger than the Well-Tempered Clavier. They're often twice as long, and it makes sense. The organ as an instrument, it's larger, it's in a bigger architecture, and Bach understood this. He understood, and I mean, don't deprive yourself of knowing these pieces. What I would tell people.
Yeah, the trio sonatas. What is the gem of the trio sonatas?
Oh, every movement,
every movement.
All of the six,
yeah.
All 16, or I should say 6 trio sonatas, 18 movements. And again, these were also later Bach, written for Friedman, so he would become a good organist. And very different. I mean, these are like the opposite of Art of Fugue, because Bach lures the listener in with such charm and ease, and they're some of the most wickedly difficult music to play. Organists will concede that. The trio sonatas of Bach are so technically difficult, but you don't know it as a listener because they're just so charming, and just the themes are so attractive.
Are they the most technically difficult, the trio sonatas?
I think that they are some of the most difficult music Bach wrote, yes.
What else would you put up there?
Well, I think some of the wedge prelude and fugue, the wedge fugue with those episodes in the middle, I mean, just this fast, it's very, very challenging. But Bach is always hard, right? I mean, to play, Bach is never easy, and you meet Bach on his own terms. But it's never impossible. It's hard, but never impossible.
Well, Paul Jacobs, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here on the show. Thanks so much for talking to us.
It has been my honor, Evan. Thank you.
So there you have it. I really hope you enjoyed this interview. Now, that quote that Paul Jacobs mentions about lose no opportunity to play the organ, I did some digging, and it comes at the end of Schumann's Album for the Young. Not the first edition, but the second edition, published in 1849, included these axioms, these pieces of advice for children in the back. And I think isn't this timely, since I just released an episode about my advice to children, and now here's Schumann's advice to children. His are a bit more deep than mine. But that famous quote where Schumann says, make the well-tempered clavier your daily bread. It comes from the same set of rules and advice for a young musician, and I will read sort of a very poetic translation of the axiom that Jacobs was quoting in this episode. There are two of them. If you pass a church and hear the organ playing, go in and listen. If it happens that you have to occupy the organist's seat yourself, try your little fingers and be amazed before this omnipotence of music. And then the one that Paul quoted, improve every opportunity of practicing upon the organ. There is no instrument which takes such speedy revenge on the impure and the slovenly in composition or in playing as the organ. Many thanks to everyone who got this episode together. Thanks to Paul for your time. Thank you, Gabby. And you can follow Mr. Jacobs' touring schedule on his website at pauljacobsorgan.com. Let me know, what do you think of our discussion? Hope you got something out of this. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the WTF Bach podcast. We couldn't make this podcast without the support of listeners like you. The best way to help this podcast along is to become a paid subscriber on Evan's Substack. You'll not only get every episode of the podcast, but detailed notes, occasional writings, and videos. You can also make a one-time donation on Venmo or PayPal. All relevant links are found in this episode's description. Give us a shout at Bach@WTFBach.com. We get notes almost every week from every corner of the globe. It makes our days to hear from you. So thank you for listening.